Farming life and the essential work of producing food for the world has long been celebrated in art, literature, and essays. Richard Scheuerman, an educator, author, and 1972 history graduate from Washington State University, wrote 3 books that take a deep dive into art and literature about farming. He covers a huge span of time and geography, from the Bible to modern literature. Welcome to the Washington State Magazine podcast. We bring you stories of Washington State University, alumni, and more. I'm Larry Clark, editor of the magazine. I talked with Dick Scheuerman about his 3 volumes, Hallowed Harvests, Harvest Hands, and Harvest Horizons. He calls for all of us to keep farms and agrarian work top of mind. Our very existence depends on a part of our society, where our food comes from, that often gets forgotten or ignored. Well, thank you for joining me today on the magazine podcast.
Great to be with you, Larry. Always a fun time for me to come back home here to the rolling hills of the Palouse country.
Yes, and the rolling hills of the Palouse country are displayed prominently in the 3 books that you've done on agrarian art and literature and agrarian themes. And I'm really excited today to talk to you a little bit about these 3 books and how they came to be and some of the themes that are interlaced throughout these volumes.
By all means, it certainly is the genesis of the work here with the hills, given my nativity to this area, and they do feature prominently in my thinking about all 3 of the volumes. They're arranged chronologically, so the first volume, Hallowed Harvests, is more of the ancient world up till early modern period. Harvest Hands is a look at more modern interpretations, particularly in the American scene and modern European art. And then Harvest Horizons is a look at contemporary issues in art and literature.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and you have spanned a lot of time and space with these volumes. And clearly, you've spent a lot of time thinking about it and working on this and gathering these beautiful examples of artworks throughout the ages. But I want to go back just a little bit. First of all, where were you born? And you mentioned your nativity, so...
Yeah, well, I was fortunate to be raised here in the Palouse country, Larry. I was born in Colfax, just down the road, raised on a small grain farm between the rural communities of Endicott and St. John in Whitman County. And so graduated from Endicott, in the late 60s, and was really blessed just with an incredible rural faculty. And I actually dedicate Volume 3 to 2 members of that group that had great influence in my life, Dave Wells and Dan Bertzel, who are still with us, and just great people, as well as a couple others who have passed on. Louise Braun grew up in Viola, Idaho, and brilliant intellectual and incredible teacher, and Arden Johnson, who herself was an art teacher. So, yeah, I grew up a farm kid and was surrounded by agrarian experience and lived there until I came to WSU in the early 1970s and did a degree in history here, and then went on to study Russian and literature and some other topics.
When you spent a lot of your working life at Seattle University, is that right? Seattle
Pacific University. Yeah, my last 10 years I was in education, private and public schooling for 35 years. And my last 25, I directed the Master's in Teaching program at Seattle Pacific University.
And during that time, you've written a number of different works about the Palouse country, about different things within Washington State history as well, including a wonderful book about Chief Kamiakin.
Yeah, the Kamiakin story has been of interest to me for most of my life, actually. Growing up here in the area, I was very interested in the stories of of our region, our ancestors. When you grow up in small towns, as you came from a small community too. Some of your best friends are 80 and 90 years old, and as a boy, I remember elders in our community telling stories of the first of our people who immigrated here in the 1880s, and they established friendships with the native population. So that actually was the beginning of my interest in the Kamiakan story, wanting to know who were those people. And actually just last week I visited with some who became fast friends up on the Colville Indian Reservation. So I spent time there, and then Umatilla Reservation, Yakima, Nez Perce, and that also has an aspect of the agrarian story. A lot of those leaders, Chief Kamiakan, Chief Moses, they were farm people. They established farms because of their association with the Hudson's Bay Company. And growing up as a boy, those experiences were very interesting to me, and laid the groundwork then for books like this. WSU Press just came out with Celebrating Palouse Country as a 30th anniversary edition of that talks about our part of the world here and the inland Pacific Northwest. And they're just, there's always another story to tell. They're fascinating for me.
Well, this, I'm glad you talked a little bit about your inspiration for those other books, because I'm really interested in how you were inspired to do this 3-volume series that covers so much fascinating material around the art of farming and agriculture and agrarian life generally.
The real origin of this, I track back, Larry, to 1989. That's when I came back here. My first 10 years of teaching and school administration were in the Wenatchee Valley in central Washington. And we still, my wife Lois and I, really consider that a second home, and we have great friendships there. And I had taught for several years there in the Kashmir area, and then I became assistant superintendent at Wenatchee and just had a great time. But after 10 years, my father had fallen ill here, and we still had the farm, and an opportunity came back to help establish a school cooperative with the Endicott St. John schools. And so I was hired to be administrative assistant there and also teach and help really facilitate the organization of the cooperative, which was an innovative way to basically save rural schools, and became a model for different parts of the Northwest. And I met a retired superintendent from California who had come up to our area named Bill Smick. Bill had a foot in the school world, and he was also a farmer in this area. And he asked me, this is in the summer of 1989, I had just recently come back, and he, for some reason that I do not remember exactly, he wanted to come up and visit the Spillman farm here at WSU. He was doing some work with some of the researchers on plant genetics, and so we just had lots of common interests. And he asked me if I wanted to bum a ride, come along and visit, which we did. Mm-hmm. And even though I had been a member of Farmhouse Fraternity here at WSU in my undergrad days, I had never been to Spillman Farm. I knew a little about Spillman. And Dr. Vogel, Orville Vogel, was the godfather of our fraternity here at WSU. And so I knew a little bit about his story and plant genetics, and counted him a great friend. And he knew my father and others that were from this area. And so anyway, I came with Bill, and it was the first time I actually saw on these test plots these grains of yesteryear, I guess I'll call them, things that I remembered my grandfather talking about: Turkey Red and Pacific Blue Stem and Jones Fife. And I just had remembered those names. And Bill showed me them, and he introduced me to the head of the research unit there, a fine fellow named Stephen Jones. Mm-hmm. And I kind of tucked that in the back of my mind. I remember taking a lot of photos. Then fast forward about 10 years ago, and I was serving with Alex McGregor, a businessman and agrarian historian here from our region,
Sure.
on the State Museum Board. And I was teaching at Seattle Pacific at the time, and we went to the state fair in Puyallup and took the grandkids and went to a building at the state fair in Puyallup that was kind of a fundraiser. They were selling things, and they had a box of old postcards. And I remember thumbing through the box of postcards, and I saw this incredible painting, copy of a painting by an artist named Robert Atkinson Fox, called The Harvest Field. And, sheaves in the background and rosy sunset and all this. And it really spoke to me. And cheap old Richard didn't fork over 25 cents to buy the thing. But on the way home, I remember just telling Lois, why didn't I buy this thing? It was beautiful. And it just stayed with me. And so not long after, Alex and I were at a meeting of the state board, we walked across the street to have lunch. And on the table in this cafe were these old magazine covers. And there was a cover there from a 1930s edition of Fortune magazine. When Fortune was founded, it was an art and business magazine, not just business. Oh. And high quality paper, and today they're collectible lithograph covers. And here was this beautiful semi-abstract view of a grain harvest scene. And I thought, I'm not going to lose this again like I did that Atkinson postcard. So when we went to pay for our bill, I asked the guy, I said, somebody's going to drop mayonnaise on this thing. They were using it for like placemats for the meal. And I said, this thing is beautiful. Can I buy it from you? He said, well, whatever the price of your sandwich is, go ahead and I'll sell you the print. So that was the start, Larry, of the great adventure. And for about 10 years, I took a deep dive into the story of agrarian art. I couldn't find anything definitively written about the entire there's all kinds of information about Van Gogh and painting his last dozen beautiful masterpieces of the grain fields, or Willa Cather and her novels about, Midwestern farm life. But I couldn't find anything kind of telling the whole story, going back in time to ancient times.
Sure.
Old Testament, Ruth
Bible.
And Boaz,
Yes.
From Sunday school, and the story of the significance of gleaning and the kinsman redeemer and the biblical messages that were, part of our lives growing up that we had studied. And then taking it all the way down to, modern times, the Jim Gerlitzes, who painted this incredible work for the cover of the third volume, and a Seattle artist, who, by the way, whose family roots are in Colfax, I found out. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the shorter version of how all this came to pass.
Well, it seems to me that, Dick, that one of these things, this is like when you dig into something and all of a sudden you uncover more and you uncover more and uncover more, kind of like what, I've read about with archaeological digs, where there's always something else.
That's right.
But I do want to mention, too, before I move on and before I forget, that I noticed the magazine covers that you listed in here. And as a magazine editor, of course, I gravitated toward, the cover of Collier's and all these other beautiful magazine covers that really celebrated the agrarian life. And they showed harvest and they showed crops.
Yep.
So I did really appreciate that. And I thought, you probably knew that I gravitated to those quickly.
Well, I'm glad you pointed it out because it focuses on how significant agrarianism and the harvest experience was in the era you're talking about, in the 20s and 30s, when those magazines, Harper's and others, would would feature these scenes. This was commonplace, whereas today it's a whole different sort of mass media look. Often, if you grab popular magazines, they tend to celebrate more spectacle. And I encountered in the process of this beautiful quote by a Polish ethnographer, Katarina Kozajka, who talks about harvest being the fundamental responsibility and endeavor that humanity has pursued since time immemorial. It's just a powerful expression, Larry, of how close we are, even if mass society doesn't always understand or appreciate it, the work of farm people everywhere in the world. We live in a very modern moment where often we just take for granted, the incredible dedicated work of farmers here and around the world to sustain all the rest of society. In earlier times, everybody participated in this in ways, and it was known much more closely. And we've seen in recent years with the pandemic and others just how fragile our food systems are in this country and in the world. The war in Ukraine, the disruption of food systems. And so we've kind of had some wake-up calls recently about how significant this is. And I hope part of what we've done, and I'm grateful for Carol O'Callaghan, the founder of Triticum Press, to put these books out to kind of draw attention to that significance.
Sure. No, and that actually leads to one of my other questions. And I think you maybe addressed this a little bit. These are 3 volumes that cover a wide range of art and society and history and different perspectives. Is there a particular theme that goes through all of the works that ties it all together?
Yeah, good question. Well, I would say the primacy of agrarian experience, that it really doesn't, it doesn't matter what anybody does in terms of how important it is for our culture, the wider world. We need doctors, we need lawyers, we need teachers, we need sanitation workers. Our society is incredibly complex, but it all rests on our capacity to consume 3 healthy meals a day, and in places where that is put at risk, it threatens, you see, that entire construct that we consider modern society. Mm-hmm. And therefore, the more attention that we pay to its viability and sustainability becomes, to my mind, an important through line that is part of what is being depicted in these great works of literature and art and also music from ancient times.
Well, that's definitely something I saw when I was reading through the books too. There is this absence within our modern society of examples of what we eat. And you're absolutely right. It's fundamental to who we are and how we function as a society, and it needs to be celebrated and shown. And, there were a lot of things that I really enjoyed. I love art anyway. Mm-hmm. And some of these, when our listeners, if they pick up these books, and they should, they'll really gravitate to some of the artworks in there. I mean, you mentioned Van Gogh earlier, for example, and I can't think of an artist from Europe of that period who's more iconic. Well, except maybe Monet. Just displaying this. And as a side note, I had the great privilege of going to the south of France a couple of years ago to Arles and some of the other places, and actually got to see in person some of these areas, and his vision of capturing the agricultural life was something special.
Yeah, it is. I haven't had a chance. I've made a number of trips to Europe, but I've not been to France to see these great treasures. I've gone to what was the largest American exhibition 2 years ago in Detroit of Van Gogh's works ever shown here in North America, and it was just an awesome experience. And I've tried to track down, and I have an appendix in Volume 2 of all Van Gogh's grain field works in museums everywhere in the world. Been able to pretty well track them all down. One's in Honolulu, by the way, so let me know when you're ready to go. We need to go take a look at that one.
I'm on board.
But yeah, they're incredible, and they really attest to his vision for agrarian experience and the vitality and the renewability of life through what he saw as the farming experience, and it's so consumed his thinking that really ultimately led in some ways to his vexation with what he saw as a incredible way of life that was being threatened by industrialism at the time. Many of those great works that you see with these colorful panoplies of grains and fields, you'll see the dark, smoky towers in the background, and what the implications are for the labor force and the well-being of mankind. And there certainly have been progress on a wide variety of technological fronts since Van Gogh's time. But we have to keep in mind what the proper balance should be so that we don't threaten the very vitality of what he was expressing through his art. The same with Monet. And it's interesting you mentioned Monet. I've been reading a little more about him lately. These things are like the song that never ends because I've been reading about one of Monet's. We saw that movie recently about the Monuments Men. Mm-hmm. And it got me to thinking, was there any Nazi looted art that were works like this that we're talking about, the great European masters from the 18th and 19th century? Well, sure enough, there were several. One of them was Monet's view of a harvest field in northern France, and it was looted in the 40s and reappeared in an art gallery in Europe in the 1960s, and it was sold to an American investor. And in the 80s, it was seen somewhere by the family of the original owner. Mm. And it led to this landmark case in American law of who owns a work if someone bought it for a considerable amount of money. It was purchased in the early 60s, as I recall, for $31,000. A Monet, as you well know, a Monet today would sell for $80 million.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so who owns that? The original family or someone who purchased it not aware of its provenance? And in that, it became a very important case. And surprisingly, the investor was allowed to keep it.
Interesting.
Yeah. And so anyway, so again, it's another interesting case where agrarian art comes with very significant implications, in this case for, American case law.
Sure. Well, I think... you mentioned this, and I think this, from what I've seen, this is a through line also with these 3 volumes. This idea of trying to make sure that we hold on to this agrarian life and, have that balance there. Mm-hmm. And you see it in a lot of pieces. And it seems to me like the medieval pieces or some of the older pieces you show in here, and actually going back to the Bible even, mm-hmm. It was a celebrated existence. It was a way of life that everybody recognized was vital to life.
Yes. Yeah, the Jewish year was organized around the harvest sequence. And so this is commemorated in the holidays, the festival of the booths and the harvest traditions. And again, as we touched on earlier, books of the Bible, I list in here in Volume 1 series of some of the real signature verses that talk about the blessings of the harvest. And again, in contemporary society, we just kind of take for granted that we're going to get 3 meals every day. And I can't remember who the thinker was who said any culture is 9 meals away from anarchy. And it's true. We get dependent on this without realizing that, again, there is a fragile nature to this. But, the Lord's Prayer is to give us our daily bread. By the way, that expression, I'm told, I'm not a Greek scholar, but I'm told that is the only time in scriptures that particular word is used. It's a single word. We translate it with 2, daily bread. But the implication is not to take this for granted. I mean, we go down and we buy for 3 weeks. I was talking to my sister the other day. Somebody went to Costco and spent $1,000 because they were planning for the next month's food. So get it before the price goes up. But Daily Bread talks about the necessity of being grateful every day for what you have and not assume that it's just going to be there forever. And all the more importance for what we attach to farmers' hard work to make this blessing available and create a stable society where others can do what they're called to do. But ultimately it rests on the health of the soil and the conscientious work of our agrarian community.
Yeah. It's so true. And one thing in these books that I think really shows it are some of the beautiful plates. There are full color plates in here, as well as, any number of illustrations that really highlight exactly what you're saying. And so I guess one of the things from my perspective, whenever I look at a book, I like to think about what went into it. So was it difficult? What were some of the challenges of collecting so many prints and plates and pulling that all together and then curating, what came together in these books?
Yeah, that's a fascinating question, Larry, that I haven't really thought much about that before, but I'm glad you asked it because it does ring true in my memory about some of the challenges of assembling this. When I started, because of work I had done with some of the other books that you mentioned, and I did a harvest history with Alex McGregor called Harvest Heritage from WSU Press. And the drill with your work in publishing. You got to contact owners of these things and get permissions and all this. And when the project started, I was dealing with that. But very soon, of course, with the early work, with the medieval material and early modern, U.S. copyright law gives you this opportunity to, gather copies of things. I think it's a rolling year. I think it's 100. So, probably 1924, 25 or something is where the magic mark is. I can't remember. I had to go back and look it all up. And I started after contacting a number of institutions to get permissions. It takes time. They usually want a royalty of some kind, and it's based on your projected sales. I mean, all this stuff gets very complicated, and then betray a family secret here. At one point, one of my daughters said, "Gee, Dad, you can just go on eBay and probably find a few of these things." And so that was a very, very dangerous thing to tell me because I found that, in fact, that the Fortune cover. There was a sister by Peter Helk, a sister cover, if you will, that was done by Fortune, that was also beautiful, done in these muted yellow, gold, and green tones of a threshing scene with a train going by in the back. Hey, for $25, I can get this thing on eBay. And so that led me down this long, long road. of starting to acquire these works, because then I didn't have to go through all the permission process. I could own them, and ultimately those would be part of the collections here at the Archives and Museum at WSU, and even works, counterproofs and others I had mentioned by Rembrandt and others are affordably available. And so that was a big breakthrough. And then the other thing related to that, Larry, that I found really interesting, when I started this work, we all know how wonderful the resources on the internet are to go anywhere and, just gather all kinds of incredible access to these institutions. But some of the works we're talking about, that in terms of those that where copyrights had been renewed, and that includes some priceless work by the Van Goghs and the Monets and others of the world, held in places like the Getty Museum and the New York Metropolitan Art Museum, those were protected. And so and sometimes I would contact these places and get them, but other times, it was just too much to afford to try to get permissions. And so initially I did not, I wrote about them, but I didn't feature them. About 5 years into the project, I would go back and I'd visit some of these institutions online. And there was a big change in attitude, and with your experience, you might know more about this than me, but I noticed about 5 years ago, I'm not mentioning the Getty and the Met by accident, and the Louvre and others in Europe, they began making those publicly available.
I did notice that.
Yeah, and so by the time I started working then with Triticum Press to put these into book-length works, those were available for reproduction. And I am so grateful that we were able then to feature great works of the European masters in these volumes.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's certainly your hard work paid off, in these volumes. You could definitely see it. Among these pieces, we've talked about a lot of different things already in the artwork. Do you have any particular favorites? Anything that really just grabbed you?
Yeah, so that's sort of like asking who's your favorite child, of course, because there is just this incredible kaleidoscope of possibilities, and so I won't claim a single, because these are just treasures across the board in each of the volumes. I will say one of the most notable was the great French artist Auguste Lermite. And he was a contemporary of Van Gogh, and just did these incredible and monumental harvest scenes in France from the late 1800s in what we would call an impressionistic, almost expressionistic style, in which it's like the heat just emanates off of these when you see these hanging. And I was stunned when I went to the Fry Museum in Seattle and found one of his foremost examples is there in their permanent collection. And that's it, actually. That
so our listeners in Seattle can still see it?
You can go to Lerma, you can go to the Fry, and it's hanging in the center of the museum. It is I believe it's the largest painting in the family's the Great House Collection, or I can't remember the name of the founder, but it's in the center there, and it's just a stunning piece. By the way, the Fry also has Winslow Homer and examples of agrarian art that he produced back in post Civil War and that era. In terms of a literary figure, maybe a little bit of a peculiar choice, but this project led me to be absolutely fascinated by a novel by Zane Grey called The Desert of Wheat because it's about our area here in the inland Pacific Northwest. Zane Grey was the Ernest Hemingway of the early 20th century, America's most popular author, writers of the Purple Sage and all this, and kind of began, this whole movement of romanticism of the American West and the experience, and mostly known for these, shoot 'em up, bang up Southwestern adventures. But he was already quite famous by 1917 when he decided to kind of take a break from it all and head out to the beautiful Pacific Northwest with his wife Dolly and others. And so he came out here, and he was feted at a dinner in Spokane at the Davenport Hotel.
Oh.
And who should be there but Duncan Dunn, regent from Washington State College. And I'm not sure, and I've tracked a little down how all this came to pass, so it wasn't a total surprise. But Duncan Dunn challenged him to focus his attention on some of the great stories and the drama that was happening here in the Pacific Northwest during that time. And I think Zane Grey was looking for a little bit of a change of pace, and one thing led to another, and he wound up crafting this incredible story that became The Desert of Wheat, which was, of course, 1917. We're talking World War I era, and a rather controversial novel, interesting in several ways. Beautifully written. And by the way, dear Alex McGregor can quote at length the opening lines of the novel, and they are evocative. So this is the story of a German family living here at a time when there's considerable anti-German warfare agitation, and how the younger generation has to adjust to this, and to prove his patriotism, young Kurt leaves his girlfriend, dear Lenore, and goes off to the fight on the front in France and is horribly injured. And so you have these various subplots. On the one hand, the farmers here all organizing against the IWW Wobblies, who were trying to organize the Bindlestiffs, the common workers, who seek to go from $2 a day to $3 a day, for a 16-hour workday, and were castigated for it. And so you have this whole tension between, landowners and socialist-leaning workers, immigrant workforce, a lot of this contemporary in our day. And at the same time, in some ways, a very conventional author-writer coming up with what is a kind of anti-war novel.
Really?
Yeah, because Kurt comes back horribly injured, and it's Lenore, this agrarian Northwest paragon of ancient Greek Ceres, and the Earth Mother, who nurses him back to health and well-being. And it's a beautiful story, and one that I hope to explore a little more fully.
I think that sounds great. You do lead off. I believe is it Harvest Horizons that has the Zane Grey?
I think
intro?
so. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember reading about it, and I haven't read. I have to admit, Desert of Wheat, but now I will. I do remember Zane Grey paperbacks around my grandparents' house. That was my grandfather's favorite author.
Yeah. Sad to report, his mansion in Los Angeles was just burned in the Eaton fire.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I lost it.
Tragedy. Well, thank you for those things, because those are a couple things that I think our listeners can definitely follow up on. They can go to the Fry in Seattle, and then they can read Zane Grey, look up Desert of Wheat, and read it.
Can I read those opening lines?
Yes, please do.
1,000 hills lay bare to the sky, and half of every hill was wheat, and half was fallow ground. And all of them, with shadow valleys between, seemed big and strange and isolated. The beauty was austere, as if the hand of man had been held back from making green his home site, as if the immensity of the task had left no time for youth and freshness. The scene was heroic because of the labor of hands. It was sublime because not 100 harvests nor 3 generations of toiling men could ever rob nature of its limitless space and scorching sun and sweeping dust, of its restless age-long creep back toward the desert that had been. Here was grown the most beauteous, the richest, finest wheat in all the world, strange and unfathomable that so much of the bread of man, the staff of life, this the hope of civilization.
And that really does capture so much of what we're talking about.
Yeah, and the fact that he was here.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So he was able to see that.
Yes.
And I know for many of our listeners and for you and I, we've seen that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, just the beauty of the Palouse and its hills just covered with wheat and other crops too.
Yes.
Wow.
In the course of putting this together, I was asked to give a talk at a conference. There's a society devoted to Zane Grey, the Zane Grey West Society, and they happened to have their national convention in Oregon several years ago. And I don't remember how they heard about what I was doing, but somehow I got invited to say a few words. Zane Grey's grandson was in the audience.
Oh.
And got acquainted with several folks in their society, and about 2 months later, I get a letter in the mail, and it says, the long-lost scrapbooks of Zane Grey showing pictures of him in the fields here at Eastern Washington that had not ever been seen since his time, nor ever published, had been found. They were in a storage locker in some California storage thing that had lost its owner or whatever, I don't know. And somebody had found it and got a hold of the society, and they kindly permitted us to reproduce images. And so we were thrilled. Again, it's just one more example of new discoveries, things from times past just always come up. I swear there isn't a week goes by that something like this we don't come across, whether it's the looted art story or these discoveries by Zane Grey's photographs of our area. So it's been quite an adventure, and it's just been a thrilling opportunity to help contribute to a grand story that our farming families are really the ones with their hands in the dirt that have brought all this to pass for everybody else's benefit.
Absolutely. And I think, as people read these books and give some thought to what you're saying about making sure that agrarian life is front and center, are there some other things you would want to tell listeners, anybody who listens to this podcast, about agrarian life? How can they connect it to their daily lives? I mean, they may be in downtown Portland. How do they connect it to their life?
Well, that's a fundamental leading question for our day. These aren't stories and principles that should be lost in the sands of time. As we've shared, they have high relevance to our present day to assure dependability and resilience of our food systems, earth care, and if you'll permit me, I'll read a few lines from Harvest Horizons that speaks to the relevance for our day and how people can participate in a grand story that's been here since time immemorial.
That would be great. Thanks.
Whether on a Columbia Plateau farm or in a Seattle high-rise, one may live with fidelity to place by learning and practicing domestic arts and community building. Family care and homemaking need not require moving back to the land, though new paradigms for remote working are facilitating rural residency. In any setting, folks can summon moral courage to eat together, shop locally to support practitioners of local crafts, connect young people to worthwhile endeavors, and affirm the values of environmental care. Policies and practice of self-reliance and promotion of the common good that characterizes republicanism in the ancient world are relevant more than ever in an era of threatened landscapes, endangered species, and marginalized labor. Ethicist Julie Krauss characterizes Wendell Berry's ongoing literary conversation about these matters as a sacred harvest for renewing the common good by promotion of connections among people, landscapes, and spirituality. In the context of farm work for participation in the market economy, or mental work for healthy imagination and discernment, Berry calls for the external standard of such endeavors the great economy, or the kingdom of God. The goal is to promote abiding, abundant harvests and the long-term well-being of individuals in community. In spite of dreams of space colonization, exploration of extraterrestrial neighbors near and far, it has been shown that, in the words of science fiction writer Kim Stanley Robinson, there is no planet B. We need to be stewards of what we have, and I commend those folks who are at work here at the university and farmers across the country for seeking the true value of stewardship, not in the greenwashing ways, but in ways that really assure future generations will benefit as we've done.
Well said. And these 3 volumes, I think, also take that idea and show it to us through literature and through music and through art. And I think readers can really get a hold of that if they look at these books. And so I guess my last question then for you is how will people get these books? Where do they go?
Oh, well, thanks for asking. Triticum Press, triticum, Latin word here for wheat, is a small Pasco-based publisher doing great work. And you can just Google triticumpress.com, and information there is available about ordering. And it's also available, Larry, through plusheritage.com, which is a site. Our family has a small farm that we continue to raise heritage grains, and there's a section there on the drop-down menu about publications, and the books are also available then at plusheritage.com. And certainly appreciate the interest, Larry, and very grateful for the opportunity to share here with a very favorite periodical in our household, Washington State Magazine.
Well, thank you for that, and I really appreciate it, Dick. This is great and a lot of food for thought. I'm sorry for the pun. Well, great. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it, Dick. It was great talking with you today. Thanks for listening. You can find links in the show notes to review the books and where to find them. If you enjoy the Washington State Magazine podcast, please share it with your friends. And leave us a good rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Thank you. This episode was produced by me, Larry Clark. Our music is by WSU Emeritus Music Professor and Composer Greg Yazanitsky.